LGBT youth and the efforts to help youth of color in Massachusetts, it may be considered a fairly progressive state. The fact of the matter is they still do have a problem with bullying in the schools. About the piece, the judges said these were all stories taken from last year's convention. Most of the ideas came from the students themselves, and they may have had some help with the editing from professionals, but these were diverse pieces, and they are consistently well-researched and well-written. This year's award for student journalism goes to Samuel Namiro Labares Bonilla. Come on. Sam's probably working. There he is.
Oh, yay.
Working already.
Good for you.
Congratulations.
Congratulations. Good to see you.
Congratulations. Well done.
I have pictures.
Oh, here we go. Pictures. Cathy.
Oh. Hi.
Perfect.
Thank
Excellent.
you.
The second award we're presenting this morning is the Award for Excellence in Radio. The story was produced for Public Radio International. It focused on a gay binational couple, Anton Tanumaraja and Brian Anderson. God, I hope I did that right. As the U.S. Supreme Court handed down last year's landmark rulings on marriage rights. The judges praised the piece for being at the intersection of several issues, LGBT rights, relationships, and immigration rights. And they went on to say that the short-form piece had more impactful content than other long-form pieces submitted for judging. For the PRI piece, entitled One Gay Binational Couple's Story and Hopes as Supreme Court Decision Nears, we're pleased to present this year's award for Excellence in Radio to Emma Jacobs of PRI.
Cathy, can we lean on you for another picture? Thank you.
I'm going to make you start paying me for this stuff.
Middle, there we go.
Perfect.
Thank you so much.
Congratulations.
Too funny.
Because she's not been busy enough doing photography as well as 16 other panels in the last 2 days, let's reintroduce you to Cathy Renna, in case you haven't already seen a panel that she's done. As you probably know, Cathy is a senior vice president at Target Q. She manages public relations and communications. She was the founder of Renna Communications, and in her 7 years there, partnered with more than 50 different organizations. She is nationally recognized both as a media relations and a communications expert, as well as a leader here in the LGBT community. We are thrilled this morning to have with us, leading our panel, Cathy Renna.
Good morning. How's everybody doing? Did you have fun last night? That was awesome. So I have the privilege this morning of moderating a really important plenary. If I could ask my plenary panel members to please come up and have a seat. I'm just going to talk for like 2 minutes, and then it's all yours, and then it's all yours. This morning's panel is a really important one, and I think really cuts to the core a lot of the issues that are being talked about throughout this conference. Diversity coverage that gets at the intersections and looks at the hits and misses in coverage of LGBT issues, and conversation about how we cover the LGBT community in smart, sensitive, and new ways. And in 25 years of doing this, one of the most common things I've said to journalists is to try and think about our community differently, especially when we've seen a ton of improvement in coverage, but to try to think of us as like a microcosm of the larger culture, because our sexual orientation and our gender identity, no matter where we fall on that, it really has nothing to do with our race or ethnicity, our age or economic status, where we live, where we come from, etc., etc., etc. And there was one person who I heard speak recently who seems to get this. His name is President Obama. And he made some comments at an event in New York City, and I just want to read them. They're really just, it's a little piece of his speech. And the reaction from the crowd was really tremendous and amazing, and a little ironic. He said, "This is a country where no matter who you are, what you look like, how you came up, what your last name is, or who you love, If you work hard and take responsibility, you should be able to make it. That's the story of America. That's the story of this movement. People who stand up and come out and march. And I just scrolled down too far, too fast. I've only had one cup of coffee. People who work against the odds to build a nation in which nobody is a second-class citizen, everyone's free to be who they are, and that you're judged based on if you're kind and competent and work hard and treat each other with respect. You're a team player. Wait. And look after your community and care and love and cherish your kids. That's how we're supposed to be judged. That's the fight that brought us here today. That's what made it possible for me to stand up here as your president. That's what gave many people in this room the freedom to live their lives more freely. It's what should inspire us to keep working to make sure all our children grow up in an America where differences are respected and even celebrated, and where love is love. And it's also why those of us who in the past might not have always enjoyed the full liberty that this amazing country of ours has to offer, that we've got to be thinking about others who are still struggling. That's why this community has to be just as concerned about poor kids regardless of sexual orientation. At this point, he was just getting ridiculous applause at every other word he said. That's why this community should be fighting for workers who aren't getting paid a minimum wage. That's high enough. That's why this community has to show compassion for the illegal immigrant. Sorry, Jose. We should talk to the White House about that. Who's contributing to our society and just wants a chance to move out of the shadows. That's why this community should be concerned about equal pay for equal work, straight or gay. That's why this community has to be concerned about the remaining vestiges of racial discrimination. If you've experienced being on the outside, you've got to be one to bring more folks in, even once you're on the inside. That's our task, that's our job, that's why we're here tonight. And the ironic thing is, right after that, at the end of that event, I was talking to the head of a national LGBT organization, who shall remain nameless, a white guy, who just, loved the speech, but said, I really think it's going to be interesting to see if our vast majority of white, male, privileged gay donors are really going to stay with us after marriage and not go home and take their checkbooks home with them. So I think it's really an interesting way to sort of jump off. And the other thing I want to say, and I'll introduce the panel, and this might be a little controversial, is that in my experience, and again, decades of doing this, sometimes it's a little harder to work with LGBT journalists on some of these issues because we bring our own baggage and our own biases, and we think in some ways, a lot of journalists think they sort of know, must know everything about the gay community because they're gay. And yesterday, on Fiona's panel, plenary about trans issues, Parker Malloy made a really interesting comment, which is that LGBT journalists should be held to a higher standard of covering trans issues. Interesting point to debate, should our own be held to a higher standard in terms of covering our issues. And the last piece is that it's not just about the media, it's also about our movement and our community, and I hope that we're able to talk about that as well, about why we've not seen the kind of coverage that we'd like to see. So without any further ado, I'm going to introduce three amazing people that we have here. We're going to speak very briefly. We're going to have I'm going to throw out a few questions, and then it's all y'all. So first, Jose Antonio Vargas. Jose is a Pulitzer Prize-winning journalist, filmmaker, and the founder of Define America, a media and culture campaign that seeks to elevate the conversation around immigration and citizenship in a changing America. Documented, which if you've not seen it is available on CNN.com and YouTube, is the first project of his production company, Anak Productions, named in honor of his grandparents and mother. In Tagalog, his native language, Apo means grandchild and Anak means child. Seated to his right is Natalie Moore. Natalie is a Chicago native. She's a Southside reporter for WBEZ-FM. She's worked at the station since 2007. She was a City Hall reporter at the Detroit News and has worked for the St. Paul Pioneer Press and the Associated Press in Jerusalem. She is the co-author of two books, Destructing Tyrone, a new look at black masculinity in the hip-hop generation, and the other book is The Almighty Black Keystone Nation, The Rise, Fall, and Resurgence of an American Gang. And last, but certainly not least, we have Wade Davis. Wade is an advocate, writer, speaker, and educator. Davis is a former NFL football player who played with the Tennessee Titans, the Washington Redskins. Have they changed their name yet? No. Okay. And Seattle. Sorry. It's a pet peeve. I lived in D.C. for a long time. And Seattle Seahawks, as well as 2 different teams within the NFL Europe League. He is currently the executive director of the You Can Play Project, an organization dedicated to ending discrimination, sexism, and homophobia in sports through the creation of curriculum, programming, trainings, and conversations focused on inclusion and diversity. In 2013, he co-founded the You Belong initiative with Darnell Moore, an organization that offers LGBTQ and straight allied youth a series of 3-day comprehensive sports instruction and leadership development clinics, as well as the creation of a speakers collective aimed at providing support, promotion, and community for LGBTQA professionals of color. So I'm thrilled to have these 3 folks, and if we want to, Jose, if you want to just start off.
Yes. Specifically, just talking about Define American and the work that we're doing.
Cathy.
So,
anything you want.
Anything I want. David Steinberg is sitting over there. I was an intern at the San Francisco Chronicle all through college, where I also worked. And David has been a friend and a mentor since. So, thank you for having me here. I've been thinking a lot about this since I was invited to go to this panel and address diversity within the LGBT movement. And I have to say that as somebody who also happens to be gay and undocumented and Filipino, I've always felt that the LGBT community, even the LGBT media, or the LGBT mainstream media, which is the big, now we have the LGBT mainstream media. I guess growing up, reading like The Advocate and Out, and even when they had that magazine XY, I don't know if people know what XY is. I never really thought I belonged in any of them. Even now, you like read through these magazines and you're like, what world do they live in? And as a person of color, as somebody who's undocumented, as somebody who's my issues, I never felt like I always felt like I had to somehow live up to that expectation or to that prism and that kind of vision of what we're supposed to be. And I guess as a young, gay kid, I in many ways I resisted my gay identity more than my immigrant identity. And I ended up, coming out as gay much earlier. I came out, when I was in right after Matthew Shepard happened. I'm part of that generation of young people that I think after Matthew Shepard, that was like a big wake-up call for us, for many of us. And then I outed myself as undocumented, 12 years later, after I had built a career as a journalist. And I'm going to give you one anecdote, actually, that I think might be interesting. So I just finished this film called Documented. In 2008, I was in Iowa covering the Iowa caucuses for the Washington Post. 4 years later, I come back to the Iowa caucuses with a camera in tow, and I crash in a Romney rally, holding a sign that says I'm an American without papers. And then, I ended up doing that, and then they got covered. They ended up kicking me out of the rally. And my iPhone was getting all these texts. And one of the texts I got from a friend of mine who works at a news organization I will not name, who said to me, "What are you doing pulling a stunt?" was the text. And this friend of mine is an openly gay journalist who happens to be white. By the way, I don't know what white is. My next film project actually is going to be on whiteness in post-Obama America. I feel like that's something that we never talk about. So my white journalist, gay friend, texted me and said, "What are you doing pulling a stunt?" And I was so pissed at him. And I called him. I said, "I'm sorry, is you being gay a stunt?" I was lucky enough to work at the Chronicle that has the history of, history of activism, you know, of course, that the band played on, and really covering LGBT issues, covering HIV and AIDS. When I got to the Washington Post, I remember being one of the few openly gay reporters of the paper, and people saying that I was using my sexuality to get ahead, which was so interesting to me. Since when did being gay something that you use to get ahead? Okay. But I was just amazed when I started covering HIV and AIDS, and I started writing about, this was the Washington Post that had never profiled Franklin Kennedy. I mean, that's like the Atlanta Journal-Constitution not profiling Martin Luther King. And I ended up profiling Frank Kennedy, and then I remember somebody telling me, that's too many gay stories. I don't think we are now at this point in which newsrooms understand LGBT issues, or so they think they do. But I think even LGBT reporters and LGBT media, I don't think understands to the fullest extent we should as a minority group in a straight society. The level of complexity that it requires to really cover diversity in a way that is as inclusive as possible of class, of immigration, of race, of ethnicity, of, you know, I don't think we're there. And I think we have to do better. So, let me just say that.
Good morning, as the Chicago journalists on the panel. Welcome to our city. I'm very glad to be here. As the Southside Bureau reporter, basically I'm an urban affairs reporter. The station is very unique. WBEZ is an NPR member station here. 91.5 if you want to tune in during your time here. So we have community bureaus set up around the city, one on the north side, one on the west side, and one on the south side, and one in Northwest Indiana. You know, over the past few, really several years, I've been pretty annoyed at the Black people are homophobic story that keeps resurfacing, especially as same-sex marriage and marriage equality campaigns are happening. And, you know, there's so much, you know, diversity within Black people, just like there are with other groups, but it just seemed like the easy go-to, and people just write off the Black people they're just homophobic. The Black church is homophobic. And you do have some prominent pastors around the country, but those are the only ones who really seem to get covered. There are so many. I mean, there's a huge Black church here, Trinity, Jeremiah Wright's church, Obama's former church. They have an LGBT ministry, but we're still just seeing the Black church story over and over again. So as you know, Illinois passed marriage equality, and when the campaign was going on, one of the editors said, "We want you to do a story." I was like, "Nope, not interested." I mean, there had been lots of coverage on the political end. "We want you to do the Black people story." And I said, "No, I'm not." Now, the South Side is mostly Black. I do end up, if you hear anything Black on the air, it's usually me. For feature stories. And I just said, I'm not, and I really battled. I said, I don't want to do this story. Well, there are caucus members, Black caucus members who are not for it. Yeah, but there are also like white people who aren't for it. Downstate, like it just becomes this targeted. And I just really, really battled and lost the battle. So I called, there's a group here called Affinity. It's the Black LGBT advocacy group. And they've been wonderful sources for me. And I was able to call the executive director and say, "Kim, I have been assigned this Black story. Please help me figure out a way to do it." And it ended up being a good, I actually just won an NLGJA award for it last week. And the story was completely different than the one I was assigned. The story was, it's the face of marriage equality to white. And I ended up convening a diverse group of people, mostly Black and Asian, at the Affinity's office, for them just to talk about their role and how they feel about same-sex marriage in Illinois. And, you know, to Cathy's point about our gay donor, white donors going to close up their checkbooks. You know, marriage isn't the number one issue for a lot of groups of color. It's probably pretty far down. They care about they care about things that other people care about and care about issues that are going on in the Black community. But, you know, I learned a lot from it. You know, they felt like they were being marginalized because there's a certain image that society was pretty accepting of with same-sex marriage. You know, two white men who are probably fashion forward, or, you know, like some of like these tropes that we think of with, you know, an acceptable gayness. Like there's no queer, trans, Latina on the front lines. And so it was a very candid conversation. I think it did move it forward from beyond, and I'm not saying this to pat myself on the back because I struggled, but I was able to turn to groups and say, you know, what can we do? What can I do that's different? Because there was, you know, I just would have gotten written up at work. There was no way I was going to do another Black church story. I go, well, why don't you do a church that's embracing? And I guess I could have done that, but I mean, let's just, like, that's like the only entree that seems to be, you know, with Black people, and there's so many other ways to be diverse. So that's my one. I have a couple other anecdotes to share, but that I'll talk about later, but that's the one I wanted to start off with. Thank you.
Good morning. Yes, I'm 5'11", 180 pounds, and I did play in the NFL, so let's kill that elephant in the room now because everyone's thinking that, wow, he's small, right? That's always something that I always get when I go speak, but I want to start kind of with a comment that my good friend and business partner, Dr. Moore, and I think it'll really frame the conversation that I want to have here today, is I think we're really easy at talking about, you know, whose feet are standing on our necks, right, or who's oppressing us, but I don't think we do a good job of talking about whose necks are our feet standing on. And I really think if we start from that framework, we'll start to really think about how do we really do diversity work, right? So when I look around this room, you know, I go, wow, you know, we're having a conversation about diversity, and the people in this room aren't really that diverse, you know, and that makes me sad, you know, but it also makes me very, very hopeful, right, that this conversation is happening. And the work that I like to do is, I like to call it coalition building, right, and solidarity work. So I just don't focus my work on homophobia in sports. I really try to push the conversation to kind of dig a little deeper and go, like, what really causes homophobia? And I believe that's sexism, right? So how do we start to have that conversation? Because homophobia doesn't exist in isolation. It's really a byproduct of sexism, right? But we don't want to have that conversation around sexism because this is a very sexist and misogynistic world, right? So the work that I do is really like, how do we get groups to work together? How do we get groups that are passionate about marriage equality to really care about the Voting Rights Act being gutted, right? I remember that week that it happened, I was literally sick to my stomach to see all of my friends have all these equal signs on their Facebook pages. But I was like, wow, like what happened a couple days before? No one wants to have that conversation. And I have a white partner, right? You know, who's comes from privilege, and we have a lot of very hard conversations. And I tell him, I said, hey, you got to start doing the work that's outside of your own mirror. You can't just keep focusing on what's in your own mirror, you know, because in his mirror, you know, racism doesn't affect him. In his mirror, sexism doesn't affect him. Classism doesn't affect him, but we have to do the work that brings coalitions together. We can never accomplish this big job that has to be done in isolation. We truly, truly can't. So when are we going to say, hey, this is not in my own mirror, but it affects me. This is my brother. This is my sister. We're all family. We truly, really are all family who's trying to do this really huge job, but we want to do it in isolation. So how can I ever expect to think that Jose would want to work with me when I do nothing around undocumented people in this country? How can I ever think that Natalie would want to work with me ever if I do nothing, the fact that black women are the lowest paid wage earners in this country. And I don't talk about that. We have to realize that our work has to begin at the margins and then get to the center, and everyone will feel involved. Everyone will be a part of the conversation. So I just want to start there. So as we start to have this conversation, how do we do real coalition building, real solidarity work that starts not in our own mirror? Thank you.
I'm in love. Okay, I guess maybe we can start out first with just a simple question to the whole panel, that if you could just sort of just shoot off a couple of thoughts. What could the media be doing to improve the situation? What are some things that are possible? You're talking to a room of journalists. What could they be doing?
I'll start. I think one of the things that I would love to see more of is reframing and debunking myths, right? Natalie touched on one, that the black community is homophobic, right? But if we look at, let's take the sports landscape, for example. You know, the most, I would say, dominant forces in LGBT sports movement are people of color. Jason Collins, Michael Sam, Brittany Griner, Derek Gordon, Wade Davis, if you want to mention my own name. We're all people of color. But the dominant narrative is that sports are homophobic, which inherently implicates the black community, right? But no one wants to write that article, have that really hard conversation to debunk those myths, you know, that really just aren't true, you know, or people say, oh, you know, sports is a homophobic space. You know, yes, there are homophobic people in sports, but not the entire landscape is homophobic. And how do we really start to debunk these actual myths and start to have really hard, thoughtful conversations that really work to get people to look, you know, and say, hey, like, maybe there's something I missed here. Maybe there's more research. Maybe there's more reading that I should do here, instead of taking everything at face value, right? So when I think about same-sex marriage, how often is it referred to as gay marriage? And I'm like, you know, like that's, you know, I get it. Like we normalize the term gay, but I don't know too many trans individuals who don't want you to say that they're trans. They don't want you to put them under this gay umbrella. You know, so I just really think that we have to start being mindful of our language, doing a lot of work to debunk myths, to reframe stories, to interrogate our own biases, to write the story that no one else is writing. You know, I think about Brittany Griner's story, and I think her story is the #1 and most important story out there in sports. Why? Because Brittany said at 4 different intersections, right? She faced racism, she faced sexism, she faced homophobia. Because of her gender expression, she faced transphobia. I don't know one athlete that went through that. No one's telling that story. You know, when Jason Collins first came out, he said, I'm black and I'm gay. No one talked about why he said I was black first, right? So there are a lot of stories that I think that are right there in front of us. I mean, they're just right there. I mean, that Brittany Griner story has been there for the whole time and no one's written it. And I can't write it because I'm too close to it, but you all can. So I think that debunking myths, writing that hard story, and reframing stories is a good start.
I think it's just like any other kind of, you know, shoe leather journalism. You just try to broaden your network of sources and also be open to being called out on mistakes. A few years ago, and I was proud of this story. So HUD was in town. They went to 3 cities. They were doing these listening sessions on discrimination in LGBT people who needed public housing. And maybe a week later, I got wind of a story, a trans woman living in senior housing who was facing discrimination, not from the local public housing authority here in Chicago, but from another resident who called her everything but a child of God. And threatened her physically. And so I went to interview her, and she's one of these women where, you know, I just got out the way. She was fantastic tame. And it turns out she went to high school with my mom. And so in my story, I said, her name is Gloria, and I said she was born George. And someone called and said, I love your story, but you really shouldn't have said that she was born George. And I accepted that criticism. I was probably doing it because I was thinking about him talking about himself in high school and like how my mom and her group of friends were really nice to him. So I think I was trying to, juxtapose, these issues in her life and her journey. And this was only a 4-minute story. This isn't like a, 10,000 word feature where I'm getting, maybe that would have been appropriate. So, I didn't tell the person, well, I didn't mean anything bad by it. Well, I'm not, I don't have any phobia. I said, I really appreciate you telling me that because it didn't occur to me. And no editor, it didn't occur to any editor. I don't think it undermined the story ultimately. At least I hope that it didn't. Because I got other positive feedback. Someone tweeted to me, I love your stories because I feel like I'm getting invisible stories that I wouldn't hear anywhere else. And I think in general there's so many, like Wade is saying, so many stories that are right there, but we have to, go outside of our comfort zone and try to, meet new people, meet new organizations, and use them as sources when appropriate.
So I started covering social media before they called it social media. And I think, for me, the most exciting thing happening in journalism and storytelling is how technology and diversity are kind of coming at this really interesting head, right? Like, if everybody now can tell their stories because of Twitter and Facebook and YouTube, and everybody becomes their own platform, right? What is our responsibility as journalists to see the intersections of these stories? Again, like kind of this age of intersectionality and this era of empathy that I think we're living in. And I find myself sometimes feeling like some dots that are obviously connected are not being connected. And I don't know why, right? So again, like one little anecdote. I was invited to give a talk at the University of Louisville in Kentucky. Because it's the only university that has like an LGBT center. And this wonderful woman, lesbian woman, invited me, hey, we're gonna have National Coming Out Week, so come. So she started promoting it. And then she started getting phone calls from all these young, mostly Latino students saying, hey, we've come out, like we'd love to come. And she's like, oh, you're gay, that's awesome. Oh, no, we're not gay. Oh, we love gay people, but no, we're not, we're undocumented. And she's like, oh, so you've come out? Yeah, we come out. Oh. And so then she did some, she Googled coming out, immigrants, whatever. She did the most wonderful thing. So she ended up hosting a whole dinner party where she invited all the out undocumented Latino students and the out LGBT students and their allies. And we had this wonderful, I was sitting there, I'm going, man, I wish Harvey Milk and James Baldwin are like going looking down and like smiling at this stuff. It's like you just see that sense of connection, and I think, so let me back up a little bit more. We are now living in a time in this country in which white people, again, I just really want to just start unpacking. White is not a country. So let's start really unpacking what that is. So 50% of kids under the age of 18 in America are not white. 50% of kids under the age of 18 in America are not white. The country will only get browner, more Asian, gayer, because more and more gay people will come out, and more immigrant, because of the fact that Latinos are now the largest minority group and Asians are the fastest growing racial group. That's America. Yet, for the most part, we still live in a predominantly the way we think. Even to me, it was fascinating watching Ferguson. And I have to say, like somebody who's Filipino, who's Asian, I've been very disappointed at the lack of and please correct me if I'm wrong, I haven't just heard a lot of solidarity from the Asian American community, you know, in terms of what's happening. Last night on Twitter, because, you know, we all have busy lives, but I just didn't know what the HRC, what GLAAD had said about Ferguson, if anything. And then, you know what happens with Twitter. They just started jumping on me. All these, like, mostly white LGBT people. Why are you asking that question? You're being divisive. No, dude, I'm just asking the question. And then they tweeted the statements that HRC and GLAAD and all these other groups have mentioned.
They did a letter.
They did a letter, which was signed by a lot of other groups. Great. Letter. Great. What else can we do? You know? And for the most part, I sat through a 3-hour dinner at the HRC dinner in DC for 3 hours. Jennifer Lopez was the honoree. She was great. Gloria Steinem introduced her. Not a single word about immigration. Not one word. I was sitting there going like, wait a second, yo. Like, what? I almost went up to Chad Griffin, but I couldn't find him. But I was just so amazed at that level of, how can you sit there and fight for marriage equality and not see all these other, if the LGBT community is going to claim the mantle of civil rights, then let's talk about John Lewis civil rights. Let's talk about the most inclusive civil rights we can possibly think about. And what does that include? So I think that's a really hard question. And I don't think we've kind of unpacked what that means, not just for the LGBT community, but the responsibility of LGBT reporters when they're contextualizing these stories.
And that actually leads to the next and only other question I wanted to have each of you address, which is that disconnect? I mean, there was a letter, it was signed by a whole bunch of organizations, but I think the question is, like, are people on the ground, or folks going, what else is happening in Ferguson? And what is the impact of this disconnect between the movement, sort of the establishment, and larger LGBT populations? And I've taken a cue from Larry Kramer. I don't say that often. I love him, but he doesn't really call it community anymore. He calls it populations because he feels like there's not the cohesion, you know, and he's right. Especially at these intersections of race and class and gender. And I really appreciate what you said, Wade, about the way I always describe it is that, you know, if homophobia is the tree, then the roots are sexism, you know. How do we start to get our organizations, all our organizations, and just our community in general, to look at these issues more keenly and make the kind of changes and move toward a future where things are more integrated, where we are a civil rights movement that really truly is looking at the intersections. And there are people doing it. Not to say no one's doing it, but I think there clearly needs to be more.
It's tough in a place like Chicago because we're so segregated already, and now you have, you know, young people of color going up to Boys Town, and that's been disruptive to the existing population. So my office used to be in Inglewood, and you might know Inglewood from the news because all that's ever covered about really Black Chicago now is how violent we are. And Inglewood is one of the most violent neighborhoods in the city, but there's still this image that it's just like Black people shooting like in the Wild West on street corners and how scary it is. And my office was there, and I hosted, and it's a community space too. Like it's just like we all work solo in these offices, and you know, we bring people into the studio, we host community events, we do partnerships, a host of things. So 2 years ago, we did this big project called Race Out Loud at the station. And I hosted a recorded event. I got two groups who don't really talk to each other, gay white men and Black lesbians. A number of, and I used different partners to help curate the group. And a number of white men were scared to come to Inglewood. And at least one didn't. Maybe two didn't, and this is very frustrating because, what do you think that we're in the WBEZ is inviting you to? Like, it's fine, but because we're so segregated, people don't leave their neighborhoods. They have no, like, comprehension of not just Inglewood, but a lot of South Side neighborhoods. So there are a lot of questions about safety. Okay, fine. And it ended up being a really great conversation, and I think they ended up keeping in touch, and just the conversation was like, what does it mean to be out in segregated Chicago? But I think just the more people you can just get into a room together, and that's the joy of being a journalist, is that we can facilitate these kind of conversations and these kind of events, and edit it down. It went on the air, had lots of pictures accompanying it, and just some really frank conversations about race and intersectionality and class. And I can't really speak about. I know that there's some groups in Chicago who are doing just like their groups nationally, but I just think there has to be ways to get people to work together, and if not work together, at least hear what the issues are, so that can be the start for something.
Okay, so I did a sports camp, my first one in Chicago, at the Center on Halstead, and it was amazing. We had about 50 youth, and I invited the NBA partnered with us, and Nike. We had all these amazing LGBT groups who were coming to do workshops, because we have workshops on health and wellness, on social justice, on HIV and AIDS, on youth leadership, and we had a lot of different groups come in and actually run these workshops. And after the first day, people were like, wow, some of these kids are homeless. And I was just like, okay. And that person said, wow, I saw some of the kids last night eating off of a free food truck. And I was like, wow, okay. And realized that, who do we imagine that we're doing this work for? And it brought to light, something that the media doesn't always do a good job of talking about who we're trying to, who are LGBTQ youth, right? But we have this image of who these youth are. And, I'll speak for myself. When I wasn't out, I hate that term, I hate the term the closet, but one of the reasons that kept me from naming who I was because I didn't never see any people of color. And there's an old adage that you never become what you don't see. And I think that has a lot of truth in there, right? I never saw myself on television. I used to watch Queer as Folk because that was the best that I could do at the time, I watched Will and Grace because that was the best that I could do at the time, and now I watch Modern Family because it's the best that I could do. And then I saw Noah's Ark. I was like, oh my God, Noah's Ark is on television. And there's another black gay guy named Wade. Oh my God, that's me. It's going crazy. I was like, wow, there's another gay guy named Wade. I'm not the only one. But I really think that, we're just not, I wrote down this word, intentionality. We have to really be intentional, extremely intentional. So if you're in a meeting talking about anything LGBT and you don't see diversity in a room, you gotta name it. You can't be afraid, you gotta speak up. And you gotta say, if this doesn't change next year, I won't be there. You can't just talk about diversity and really, because that's become a really great word now. The word intersectionality, like Kimberly Crenshaw should be rich off of that word by now, right? Because everyone just says it, but do we really live it? Do we act it out? Do we be it? And when I think of when Jose mentioned HRC, I wanted to slice my own neck, right? Because I'm like, wow, this organization has so much money. So much money. Give it away to some grassroots organizations that are really doing work on the ground. That are really actually out there getting their hands dirty. Because they're the big elephant in the room or the big gorilla in the room that they're called. But call them out. And be intentional about make sure that, because they need your dollars. And we will keep giving out our dollars to them. But are they really doing intersectional work? right? Or are they just throwing out those terms or writing letters? You know, get like the people who are in Vargas right now are actually getting their hands dirty. You know, and whether you believe whether or not that what happened was a murder or a killer or not, but I know that you do see that Ferguson doesn't live in a vacuum, right? I do think that we can all agree to that, right? So whether you agree with what's happening or not, but agree to the fact that there are people in this country that are hurting. You know, that the American dream that was promised to them hasn't ever been validated. You know, and what Ferguson is, I believe, is people actually showing you that they actually are here.
I recently did a Tea Party event. I made a film, so I made the film, and I had a Tea Party screening. It wasn't that big, but it just wasn't that big. But I'm really big on, we gotta preach beyond the choir. How do I get myself as uncomfortable as possible? Right? Because they're like, why should you be Mosaic, you're Asian, you're gay, you're a busy legal person, and you majored in Black Studies in college. What is that about? Like, that, right? And I feel like the conversations we have about diversity are too comfortable. I think a lot of it is very kind of, you know, and again, this is why I find this whiteness film project so interesting. I'm going to start filming next month. Everybody in America now feels like the other. So when I outed myself as undocumented, I ended up doing I've done maybe 300 events in 42 states in 3 years. Maybe 95 college campuses, all across. I spent a month in Alabama. And that's when I really got to know, you know, and again, like as a walking uncomfortable conversation, you enter a room, and then you tell them these things, and then it just kind of goes. And then it always ends up about, well, wait a second, like your point, wait about the American dream, right? This country isn't mine anymore. You have Barack, Michelle, you have Jay-Z and Beyonce, you have J-Lo, you have Jeremy Lin, you have all these Asian people, the gay people, whatever, right? And if I'm like a straight, heterosexual white guy, which is, you know, because we throw the word privilege a lot, by the way, which really worries me. The word privilege just worries me. I don't know why, it just worries me because I feel like when we say that, I don't think we're fully acknowledging the issues involved about sexism, classism, you know, racism, that. And it wasn't until I started talking to working class white people who feel as if their own country is being taken away from them by people like me. And then I have to look them in the eye and say, yo, like, I like your apple pie. I'm not here to take away your pie. I'm here to actually make it bigger. If I'm not willing to kind of go there and tell them that when we talk about diversity, I'll actually include you. Like, why is it when we talk about diversity, we don't include white people in the conversation? It's usually people of color talking about the white people, sometimes badly. So how do we actually, that's why for me, it's like white to me doesn't exist. When I was growing up in the Philippines, I didn't know black and white. You know, we listened to Whitney Houston and watched Pretty Woman, and we didn't call them black or white, we just called them Americans. It wasn't until I got here that I realized that they were, oh, black and white. So I feel like we're now at a point in this idea that everybody's the other in America, that this better way of like, this is why what we do as journalists is so important. Because we're the ones that has to connect that and insist on connectivity.
Thank you. So I'd love to take some questions from the audience. Have we got? I'll play Phil Donnie. I love playing Phil Donnie. Do you want my sneaker? First of all, thank you. My name is Christy Smith. I'm a managing partner with Deloitte. So I'm going to not speak from the media standpoint, but talk from the private sector. So on your last point, Jose, I actually think that we need to retire the word diversity.
I'm sorry.
We need to retire the word diversity. In the research that I've done, it is either meaningless or a lightning rod in the corporate setting. I do believe strongly that media, in conjunction with the private sector, will drive change, especially for those underrepresented either at the top
or within organizations. So I guess my question to you is really where I've been focused is this is not a diversity and inclusion issue that we're talking about. This is an issue of leadership and how leaders choose to show up. And in the private sector, when leaders choose to show up, change happens. DOMA is a good example of that in our own community. But I wonder, beyond media, or at this intersection of media and the private sector, what are your recommendations, or what is your experience in bringing the two together to really drive change?
Is that a question?
It's Daniel.
One comment on this leadership, which I'm glad you bring up. I recently moved back to San Francisco, and I've been gone for 10 years. I look at Yahoo, I look at Google, I look at Facebook, I look at Twitter. I look at the staff in these organizations. I look at the people who use these tools. I look at the state of journalism, which, when I was growing up, when we had Unity, although there's still Unity, the convention, right? When we had actual way to actually recruit, quote-unquote, minority journalists in newsrooms. I actually think the state of, quote-unquote, diversity minority in newsrooms is probably worse now than it was 10 years ago when I was starting out. What is the responsibility of these new... Marissa Meyer says she's building a news media platform. What is the responsibility of these, quote-unquote, tech media companies to help improve representation? Let's not talk about diversity. I love that, by the way. Representation in newsrooms and in their organizations. I think it's an obligation. If Mark Zuckerberg, who's actually ended up profiling him for the New Yorker a few years ago, he's not what people think he is. I've had conversations with him about this idea of, if you say that, Facebook is helping connect the world, connecting them to whom? Is it just kind of already perpetuating the filter bubbles that we all kind of live in, right? Like, it's really been fascinating watching Twitter and, Ferguson, because Black Twitter and kind of how Black people are using Twitter, and you look at Twitter and you look at the lack of diversity within Twitter. I don't know. Like, I feel like I'm really excited about being able to engage a lot of these leaders in Silicon Valley to figure out how can they better represent not only their organizations, but the responsibility is to news and media.
I just turned in a story last week to Ebony, a freelance piece, a Q&A with Jesse Jackson about all his efforts in trying to diversify Silicon Valley. And this was like a crash course for me in doing this story and getting up to speed. But these companies didn't want to release their data. And so then, if you're not aware of Black Twitter, like, it is such a force.
It's awesome.
Paula Deen, like, it's like critical race theory, but like comedy. And so Color Change and Jesse Jackson teamed up and said, well, guess what? We're going to do a Twitter campaign, Twitter, if you don't release your stats. So, like, taking the master's tools.
Well, Audre Lorde there.
But really what happened is that Google released first, and then all the other ones released. And so, private industry journalists, we're all copycats, right? Like, somebody does something, and then everyone else feels comfortable doing it. But, beginning, to out yourself, out your company, say, our numbers are terrible. Just be transparent. And I think that can go for any industry. And I think that's the first step. Releasing the numbers, saying that you have a deficit, and then asking for help to make it better.
Your question is a great one. It also scares me a little bit, though, if I'm being honest, because if Jay-Z has this line that he says, the higher up I go, the less people look like me, right? So if you think about the people who run a lot of these organizations and companies, like, our world is segregated on unfortunately, right? So where are they getting their information from about how to do this intersectional work, right? And if everyone in the room is male and white, then I worry about how that work gets done, how the conversations get framed, right? So I do believe that there is a role for the private sector, but I think that role is to make sure that they're, as Jose mentioned, that they're really uncomfortable, right? By bringing in other people in the room. So when you think about philanthropy, right? Like typically people who are giving out money, they're white men, right? And they give money to where they think that the money should go, and it's rarely ever an all person of color organization, right? So if we're thinking about private sector doing this work and leading this work, who are they really, what's in their mirror, right? So that really scares me. And Jose mentioned the word uncomfortable, and I think that is, as an athlete, that's what made me grow, right? Every coach I had, made us uncomfortable as possible because it forces you to grow. And I think that if we all sit in that space, in that mindset, that we'll start to grow. But it also goes back to, we have to be really intentional, highly intentional, right? To look around the room. So, if you're at a board meeting and everyone looks like you, can your work really be diverse? I know you don't like that word, or representational of like all communities. I find it hard because then your thoughts are framed by the media, and they mentioned Black Twitter. The reason why Twitter is probably the most used space by the Black community is because we can control the narrative finally. Finally, like we can control the narrative. Like no one can say what's happening. The problem is people who aren't Black don't read it. So it's like, yeah, we're controlling the narrative, but no one listens to it because like, oh, they're complaining again. So it's a really great question, but I think the bigger question is how do you get diversity or multiple representations in that room in the private sector, because otherwise we're just recreating the same old thing.
I have an answer for that.
Okay, I've got a question back here.
Hi, my name is Robert Naylor. I wanted to ask a question about the diversity that all of you talked about. I worked for the Associated Press for 24 years, and for my entire career there, I fought against the use of the term Black community. For the very reason that Natalie talked about, because I thought it ignores the diversity of African American communities and populations, and I think it sort of makes us all reach for a norm that ends up perpetuating stereotypes.